Activists and faith leaders are pursuing a new path to changing the name of Faneuil Hall after calling for a national boycott of a historic meeting place. They're asking for the change to be discussed at a public hearing. The hall was named, of course, for Peter Faneuil, a merchant and philanthropist who was also a slaveholder. To tell us about the effort is one of its leaders, the founder and executive director of the New Democracy Coalition, Kevin Peterson. Thank you very much for being with us.
Glad to be here.
First of all, Kevin, you call for a national boycott. This is for all the tourists who come here for the history. How is that coming out so far?
Well, 20 million people come through the campus of Faneuil Hall and the Quincy Marketplace campus, so to speak. 20 million people per year. That's the equivalent of Foxborough Stadium every single day. We want to educate those people who go through that campus about the slave legacy of Peter Faneuil and Faneuil Hall in particular. It was constructed based on a sale of a African slave boy. There are many in the African American community and beyond who think that that legacy is not one that should be celebrated as a public space. So we want to change the name. So we've initiated a local and national boycott focusing on African American tourists and African Americans in Boston, but also soliciting the larger community of concern who see this as a problem in the city of Boston, and particularly see this as a potential pathway of deeper racial dialogues and action within the city.
Well, you had a number of activists and faith leaders out there last week. Why is this important to them?
Well, it's important because Boston remains so racially divided. Michael Che, the Saturday Night Live comedian, said that Boston is one of the most racist cities that in the country. There is some truth to that. The Boston Globe documented that reality of Boston being racist in its Spotlight series on race at the end of 2017. So there is empirical evidence that the city is mired in what some may say structural racism, and that these issues need to be addressed. Now, we can address those issues by dialogue. One way of addressing getting to the dialogue is about addressing the symbols and the icons in our city that we celebrate, one of which is Faneuil Hall, and we need to change that name.
But of course, this is a case where the hall's an icon, but for many of us growing up, Peter Faneuil, we didn't have a clear notion of who he was at all.
Yeah, because his history as it relates to slavery has been suppressed just as much as slavery in Boston has been suppressed. This is the weakness of our democracy, the feebleness of our civic literacy, so to speak, our ability to sort of understand historically where we come from and where we need to be going in the context of democracy. That requires information. And sadly, thousands of school children throughout the city of Boston aren't clear about the symbolisms and the suppressed history connected to Faneuil Hall and Peter Faneuil in particular.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition. Kevin, you're probably aware there's an idea out there for a work of public art in the hall. I think the city has a foundation that's sort of looking into this. What about public art that would sort of bring some of that negative history to light? Public
art is cool. This exhibit is, as I've said on the record, is lovely within a certain context, however. There have been activists and boycotters and clergy members who've been pushing for the change in the name of Faneuil Hall as a primary effort for the mayor to engage in. Instead, the mayor, as we're in the midst of organizing, presents this public art around the slave auction. Now, I don't think, and many others don't think, that this is the particular way to start an issue around race, to address the issue of black misery in particular by constructing a slave auction that will be warmed to the body temperature of a slave, that would be embedded in the ground. There is an awkwardness about the presentation. Although I think the effort and the interest bear some merit, but not at this point. We need to have some dialogue before we get to. The example is that in Charleston, South Carolina, for example, there was a period of public dialogue lamenting reckoning in terms of slavery. What came out of that? An apology from the City Council of Charleston around its connection to slavery, and then comes a public monument around slavery. We need to do it in a way, do a public art memorial to slavery in the right way, in the right sequence.
Of course, further background here, and this is not just about Boston alone,
Yeah.
that the whole colonization of
That's
this
right.
hemisphere, I mean, economically it was founded on, slavery was fundamental to that.
It was fundamental. It was at the root of it. The slave triangle, the history tells us, rum was traded for human bodies and money was involved from the Caribbean to Europe to Africa. It was the fundamental economic driver that created what became the United States. We, however, have not been able to reckon with the spiritual and the cultural misery that's connected with that. Next year is the 400th anniversary of the first slaves coming to Jamestown in 1619. It's so sad that the nation hasn't quite come to grips around how we deal with the issues, and it's mostly through deep dialogue and conversations between humans, blacks and whites, who are the legacy of the slave trade. We hope that the Faneuil Hall project, a grand civic project that uses Faneuil Hall as a metaphor around which we become better around race in this city, will also be expressed across the nation, as in some instances it is.
Well, you've been at this campaign for a while, so what's the next step?
Over a year. Well, we've initiated a boycott, as we mentioned. We will stay with the boycott until we find that our demands have been met. And one of the initial demands is a hearing. We want a public hearing. It's absurd, it's asinine that citizens, particularly black citizens in this city, which is purportedly a democracy, cannot get a hearing on an issue of public concern, race. So we will continue to boycott. We'll engage in a sit-in soon at the Quincy Marketplace, which was a slave port. Slaves were auctioned off in that space, and there's no acknowledgement of that. So we're going to continue a boycott rigorously until we get an answer from the mayor about how we move the racial issue in this city a little further down the line in terms of improvement.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Kevin Peterson from the New Democracy Coalition.